Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, everybody. It's wonderful to see all of your smiling faces. Today, I thought, what better way to get into the Christmas spirit than to draw a Christmassy picture, which, by the magic of video editing, you see here behind me right now. Real simple and easy to do. We're going to be drawing some candy canes and a little border around the edges and some holly leaves at the bottom. Not much to it. Let's get started. Put these aside for a minute. All you're going to need is a pencil and something to add color with, whether it's crayons, colored pencils, markers, whatever you've got. For starters, I'm going to point right at the middle of my paper, and that's where my candy canes are going to cross. You saw how I had these two laid out here just a second ago, like the letter X. That's what we're going for. And in order to draw our candy canes, we kind of need to see what shape they are. Notice that it's basically like the letter J, except it's not as skinny as a pencil line. It's got some thickness to it. So I want to make sure I make it more like a box letter J, except I'm not going to do it up and down. I'm going to do it at a diagonal with the hook part up at the top. Real simple and easy to do. The way I'm going to do that is make a diagonal line as if I were going to make an X, and then at the top just kind of hook it over. And then from the end of that hook, I want to kind of round off the edge as if I was drawing like a wormy shape. And but then that worm is going to curve and follow this straight line all the way down, and then curve off again at the bottom. And there we have our little candy cane shape. We want our other candy cane to crisscross over it this direction. We want to use overlapping, which means we're going to make it behind the first one. When things overlap, you can't see the one that's behind. And to draw that, we're going to do some bumping and jumping. I'm going to draw the same shape, but I'm going to do it going the other direction. And when I bump into my candy cane, I jump over my candy cane and keep that line going. I want it to be about the same height, the same length. There we go. I've got my hook. Curve around the end to make it a thicker shape instead of just a line. Follow along straight. Oh, just like before, when I bump into the candy cane, I jump over it. Keep going. Round off that end. And there, that looks like another candy cane going that way. Now, these candy canes do have stripes on them. We're not going to do that with our regular pencil. We're going to do that with color later. So before we add any color, before we add any of those stripes, let's move on and talk about our holly leaves. We're going to have some little holly leaves down here at the bottom. And the way that I like to draw those holly leaves is start with a sort of curved swoosh. That's going to be the central core of the leaf. And then I'm going to have sort of a smile shape above it and a frown shape under it. And then I'm going to connect the dots from the end to the end with a curve, from the end to the end with a curve, and a curve. And there's a holly leaf. Now, in case you missed that, in case you were hiding under a rock and forgot to pay attention, I'm going to draw another one. My next one's going to go this direction. It's going to go off to the other side. So I'm going to start with a swoosh. I'm going to put a smile up above it and a frown down below it. And then I'm going to connect the dots from end to end with a curve, not a straight line, a curve. From end to end with a curve. From end to end with a curve. And from end to end with a curve. There's two holly leaves. If they don't end up being the same size, that's fine. That they're not, we're talking about nature here. leaves in nature aren't the same. Like they're similar, they're the same-ish, but they're not all the same. So if they're different sizes, if one's a little bit bigger or smaller or longer or shorter or fatter or whatever, it's totally okay. I'm gonna do one more. I'm gonna have one coming up this way. Okay, if it's going up that way, then I'm gonna turn my paper sideways so that I can make my smile and my frown, and then connect, and connect, and connect, and connect. There's my holly leaves. I also want some holly berries, some little berries. Now, usually holly berries come in little sets of 3, and they should just be nice, perfect circles. 1, 2, 3. I want a couple sets of 3. I don't want just 3 berries and then call it done. I'm going to put another set of 3 holly berries here, and you can kind of spread these out wherever you want. Don't do too many of them. Don't do like 600,000 of them. Just kind of spread them out wherever you want, and they don't have to be symmetrical, right? Like over here I've got them on the bottom, over here I've got them on the top. It's fine. They don't have to be in exactly the same place, right? Just kind of, you decide where to put some little sets of holly berries. I think that's good. Next, we want some kind of a border around the edges. Now, you can do your border however you want. I personally am going to wait and do my border with color, I think. But something around the edges to frame the picture. So I'm going to switch over to colored pencils to make my border. And really for this project, no matter what you're using, whether you're using colored pencils, crayons, markers, whatever, we want to kind of limit ourselves to just the Christmas colors. So I'm picking a red and a green, and I don't need a white colored pencil because my paper is already white. So I'm just going to stick with just these 2 colors, red and green. And I think for my border, I am going to do squares in the corners that have sort of diagonal stripies to them, sort of reminiscent of a candy cane. And again, like I said, you can do anything you want for the border. Your border does not have to look like mine. But we want something around the edges to make a frame around your picture. Okay, so I'm doing the corners first, and then I'm going to kind of connect between those with some shapes and stripes and lines and things. And I'm going to incorporate both of my Christmassy colors, my red and my green, but I'm also going to be leaving a lot white, because white is also a very Christmassy color. Okay, next to my sort of box in each corner, I'm going to have a couple of green stripes. And then I'm going to leave a space. I'll come back to this here in just a minute. So I'm just doing a couple of green stripes. And then I want some little swooshy doodads in my border here, but I want a kind of sort of centralized dot there, breaking it into 2 different swooshy shapes. And then my swooshy shapes, I'm just going to kind of, they're almost like a really tall S, right? Right? Like that looks like the letter S, but really tall. Again, do you have to make your border the same way I'm making mine? Absolutely not. You can make your border however you want to make your border. It's totally up to you. But I like the way that kind of comes together. I'm going to make all 4 sides be like that, although I might add some extra frilly onto, yeah, I like that, I like that, I like that. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom, in case you want to follow along with my border and copy my border. I did the corners with red and white stripes. And then I'm doing 4 green stripes on each side. And then a red dot in the middle. And a big sort of S shape, sideways S shape. Here and here. And then I added some extra little frills to that S shape to make it look a little bit more frilly. I'll do the same thing on the sides as well, framing it here on the sides. This, you know, the side is a lot longer than the top and bottom, so if I do it exactly the same, then these little S shapes will just be stretched even longer, which is fine. Or I could mix and match and do something else in there. I don't know, we'll see. I personally will probably just keep it the same, let it be a pattern, let it repeat the same way all the way around. So that just means a dot in the middle, a dot in the middle, and then really long stretched out S shapes. And I'm going to hook that over quite a bit. And then I added these extra little frills to the S shape, so it's not just the letter S. Yeah, okay. And then the same thing here. And then the same thing again on this side. There. Now, coming back into the central part of our picture here, where our candy canes and holly leaves are, I want to start adding like the stripes on my candy cane, coloring in my leaves, coloring in my berries, all of that kind of stuff. Now, with the berries, if you want them to look really shiny, the way to do that is to color them with, but leave a white spot. Okay, in order to do that properly, you need to kind of figure out which direction the light is shining in from. Now, I have gone and sharpened my colored pencil so that I can color more precisely in these little dots, these little circles. But each one of these little circles, if I want it to look really shiny and sort of round and three-dimensional, what I want to do is start by making a tiny little circle. Notice in the top right, I'm just assuming the light is shining in from this direction. And I want to leave that circle white, that tiny little itty bitty circle white, but color the rest of this berry red. So it's a red berry, but it has a white spot. Again, I'm going to start by drawing a little circle where I want that highlight to be, and then I'm going to color the rest of the berry red around it. Right there, it kind of looks like little eyeballs. But if we do this with all of them, then they'll look like shiny red berries. And again, you could do that whether you're using marker, colored pencil, crayon, whatever. Crayons are going to be harder to get really tiny details. And if you're having trouble getting that tiny little detail of the little white dot, don't worry about it. Just color the berry red and you're done. You don't have to, you know, you can skip that little shiny spot if that's too difficult. or if you just don't want it. But we're going to repeat that for all of the berries, color all of the berries in. And then we'll move on to the candy cane while we still have our red out, and then we'll switch to our green for the green holly leaves. And that'll be kind of our finishing touch with the leaves. When we do move on to the candy canes, we need to consider that it's both red and white stripes. And colored pencils, crayons, markers, those things don't really erase very well. Even colored pencils, even if you have the erasable colored pencils, they don't erase very well. So you really want to be careful not to color any areas that you want to stay white. Just don't do anything to them. Notice that these stripes are there. If you're looking at just a candy cane, the stripes are not horizontal and they're not vertical. They're at a diagonal. But they're diagonal to the candy cane itself, which might not necessarily be diagonal on your paper, like depending on which angle you've drawn it, right? If I had drawn the candy cane like this, those lines would be vertical on my paper, but they're diagonal when you compare it to the candy cane, if that makes sense. So I like to turn my paper to where I'm looking at the candy cane straight up and down, and then make diagonal lines. Now, depending on the type of candy cane, sometimes they are really tall diagonals, sometimes they're shorter diagonals and spiral around more times. You can really decide how you want that to work. Also, like this candy cane here has like a thick red stripe, then a big white stripe, and then 3 tiny red stripes, right? So I could do thick red and then 3 tiny red and then thick red and then 3 tiny red, or I could just kind of do them all the same. It's really up to you. But I'm going to start off with a diagonal stripe right here. And then I think I'm going to do just like this one, thick and then 3 thin, thick and 3 thin. I think I'm going to do it the same way. And so for the thin lines, I'm just going to go line, line, line. But they stay at the same diagonal all the way up, okay? So that's, again, a thick stripe where I color in a stripe, and then line, line, line. Okay, and then again, thick stripe where I color it in, and then line, line, line. Thick stripe where I color it in, and then line, line, line. Now here, where my candy canes overlap each other, it's going to be very important that we make sure we only see the stripes on one of them. We don't want our stripes to crisscross each other. You'll see what I mean. Right now I'm drawing the one that's on top. If I were drawing this one first, I would just not draw anything here where they overlap each other, right? We'll also talk in a second about shadows and how, you know, when two things overlap each other, they're going to have a shadow between the two things. But that's that'll come in just a minute. As I'm wrapping around the curve here, you know how I said a minute ago that I like to turn my paper so that my candy cane is vertical and then make my diagonal stripes? Well, as we get to this curve, I'm going to be turning my paper along that curve so that I can draw them more accurately. So as the candy cane curves, I need to turn my paper, and then I'm still making a diagonal stripe. And you notice it's not the same as these other diagonal stripes because it curves, right? Look at the way this candy cane, look at the way that these diagonal stripes, as they get up to the top of the candy cane, they curve and then go the other way. Okay? So sort of like this. right? So you see how they turn and they go a different direction? Now, I think I also want to really darken up this outline with a red, because like when I look at my candy canes, I don't see a black line around the outside. I also don't see a red outline around them, but if I'm going to have an outline around the edges of it, I think a red outline works best, because that goes along with the same color as the stripes on the candy cane, and it's more festive and cheerful and Christmassy to have a very red outline as opposed to a black outline. So you could leave it without an outline, or if you're going to do an outline, I would use red for the outline, not black. Okay, and then you'll just repeat the exact same steps for this candy cane. The only difference being that when it overlaps, you've got to consider your stripes go underneath that. So just like the candy cane itself, we bumped and then jumped, you're going to do the same thing with your stripes, right? So 3 stripes and then a big thick stripe, 3 stripes and then a big thick stripe. I'm just doing it exactly the same way. And like I said before, you don't have to do the 3 stripes and then a thick stripe. You could do it just all the same stripes. It's totally up to you. But then when I get to the intersection, the overlapping point, these 3 stripes, notice how they stop when they get to that candy cane. I don't draw over, I don't draw through. Right? And then the next one's going to be a big thick stripe, and notice that it stops right behind that candy cane. It doesn't draw through that candy cane. Okay? That makes it look like it's behind, it's overlapping. Okay? And again, just like before, when we get up to the top edge of the candy cane where it curves over, we're going to curve our stripes and then let's go ahead and do the red outline again, just like I did on the last one, and that'll finish that up. And then when I'm done with that, all I've got left is the leaves, the holly leaves, which when I color the holly leaves, I don't want to just color them green and just say, there, I've colored it green. I might want to consider using highlights and shadows. I might want to consider, speaking of shadows, I forgot to mention how I'm going to make a shadow where my candy canes overlap. I should do that. I should talk about that before I move ahead to the leaves. So as I finish the outline around the candy canes, let's take a look at what happens like when one object covers another object. So my hand is covering up part of the paper. They're overlapping, right? And do you see the shadow underneath my hand on the paper? That's what we call a cast shadow. My hand is casting a shadow onto the paper. Well, if we have candy canes that overlap, the one on top is going to cast a shadow onto the one under it. I could get out a black for my shadows, but that would be way too dark. If I use a red for my shadows on a red candy cane, then it's just going to blend with what's there. If I use a green for the shadows on my red candy cane, then it will contrast against the red of the candy cane because these are complementary colors. So I'm just going to use a green right here. I'm not going to use much of it, just a little bit. Right at the outside edge, I'm putting that shadow on the candy cane that's underneath. The one that's on top stays white and red. The one underneath it gets a little bit of a green shadow. Okay, Not much, don't overdo that. It's just a little bit, and it just gives us that indication that one is on top of the other, casting a shadow onto the one underneath it. Okay. Now, while I've got my green out, let's move on to these leaves. The way that I'm going to do these leaves, now if you're doing this with a marker, you won't be able to blend like I'm doing. So if you're doing this with a marker, just color the leaves green and call it done. Or maybe color the leaves green and then do some black tracing of the outlines. But if you're using crayons or colored pencils, then you can change the pressure, right? So I could be soft and gentle while I color the leaf in. I'm not pushing hard, I'm being gentle. And then I can push harder to make darker edges, darker outlines, darker detail marks, right? Because I'm definitely going to want this line down the middle to stand out. I think what I'm going to do is get all the outlines darker, where I'm just pushing super hard along those outlines. And then I think I'm just going to leave it like that, where it's shaded lightly on the inside, colored lightly on the inside, and then has those dark green outlines. I'm going to do that for all three of my holly leaves. Push hard for the outlines, but then color it in softer. Yeah, I really like the way that's turning out. I'll do this last one exactly the same way. Color it in softly, and then push hard for the outlines. And there we go. I'm going to call that done. There's one last tiny little thing that I need to do, and that is sign my name. I can use either the red or the green. I'm going to use the green, and I'm going to sign my name. You want your name, your signature, to be small. You don't want your signature to like be huge across the whole page so that it overpowers your picture. Like, you want the candy canes and the holly leaves to be the most important part of the picture. But you also do want to be able to read your signature so, you know, people know who made it. So I'm going to put my signature right here. I sometimes sign my initials and sometimes sign new, like Mr. New. There we go. I'm done. That's all there is to it for making our Christmassy candy caney picture. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I can't wait until our paths cross again. Have a Merry Christmas, everybody.